today we will take it much beyond our current discussion. We want to look at this vision of the much broader sustainable development debate and see how we can, from the agroforestry perspective, make some real contributions to that. So the day was prepared by Jack, Bo, Peter and me together. And Peter will run us through the program of the day, and then we start with Jack with the lecture.
Thank you. We just want to talk a little bit today about tree-based contributions to sustainable development goals. We all know that what is big in the global development agenda now is really sustainable development goals. So what do we know within ICRAF, exploring that a little bit with respect to specific goals? What do we not know? What do we want to learn more from the things that we are doing? But more so looking at how we want. So let's go into what are some of the objectives of the day. We've got 3 things to look at. The first one is explore and discuss the place of agroforestry in the SDG framework, and that we're starting with looking at what we have basically to bring into that process. The second, part of today is really reflecting, looking at a process of bringing together the evidence base that we have within the institution and how we can use that in future engagements in the SDG process. Because this is just beginning. Next week in New York, we'll have discussions beginning. But I can assure you at the moment, setting the stage, the partnerships are already being set up, and we need to be part of that process. And this is what today should be about. The third part is really to develop a strategy and a plan for ICRAF, towards a strategy and a plan for ICRAF engagement in that process. From a bigger picture, what is it that we need to be doing to be part of that process? In terms of how we've been trying to put together that evidence base, I think it's building on from a set of 3 things that we've been trying to do on tree-based sustainable development. One, we did how trees and people co-adapt to climate change. The one on negotiation to support toolkits for learning landscapes and looking at climate-smart landscapes. These were sort of products that we've been doing in terms of looking at. But today we will focus in the next session on early drafts of briefs that are digesting sort of our work and linking those to very specific SDG goals. And that we'll look at in the next set of sessions that we'll have early this morning after the break. And here is the layout of what we've been trying to do in terms of bringing together the briefs, digesting what we do. So with respect to SDGs 1, 5, and 8, ending poverty, Lei has been, leading that process. With respect to SDGs 2 and 5, achieving resilient food security and addressing malnutrition, Fergus has been, working and thinking around that, leading the group. 3, 5, and 12, achieving health and sustainable consumption. Ramni, who's not with us, but we have Lars and some other people working on that as well within the group. 6 and 4, the water cycle and oceans, Maina has been leading that. 15, terrestrial biodiversity as part of protecting our planet, Jianshu. 7, 9, and 11 on sustainable energy, climate-smart infrastructure, and cities. Miyuki has been leading the group that has been working on that. And then we have 13 on climate change that has been led by Rodel Lasco. And lastly, a bigger group of 4, 10, 16, and 17 on education, gender, peace, transparency, and means of implementation led by Delia. So basically, We will be spending a lot of time in the next session walking around these things, which is session D2. D3 will be looking more at how do we look at our specific eco-regions, the way they are, Mekong, tropics, drylands. How do we engage in terms of SDGs on the specificities of agroforestry and how it links into SDGs within those eco-regions, basically. And then in the afternoon, we will have a panel discussion organized by Ujwal, and Ravi will facilitate that, where we have some of our Indonesian partners that will discuss how we take this forward, what are the implications for how we work, not only in Indonesia, but globally as well, and trying to look towards the bigger question. And that sets the scene then for work that will be done beyond today, because we need to emphasize that this is beyond today. Once we finish today, it gives us a lot of homework for how we bring up that strategy and how we engage going forward. And I'll call on Sheikh to give you more details on some of the thinking around this.
Thank you very much, Peter. So let's now try to flesh out some contents about these SDGs. What does it mean? What are the key principles? Where do we come from? And how can we nudge down the research we're doing in ICRAF with these SDG principle objectives and motion internationally? So I suggest this slide you have seen before in one of my previous presentations about the itinerary we have been following to come to these SDGs. So to speak, the SDGs is a baby of science, because the science has been demonstrating how important sustainable knowledge is contributing to development. So what we can see in this slide is why do we migrate from the MDGs to the SDGs. A lot of evidence has come over the time, evidence on biodiversity, evidence on climate change, evidence on issues related to livelihood, and a lot to do with ecosystem services, not only the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, but recently the Intergovernment Platform for Ecosystem Services, which is trying to do the scoping and the assessment of ecosystem services and biodiversity across the world, with a regional emphasis on what it means to people to use natural resources as a way of survival, as a way of subsistence. And this has been giving a lot of evidence on the importance of the environmental must-have aspects that should be included in development process to ensure, better people, wealthy people, together with sustainable environment. And that's the sense of having the SDGs, and ICRAF cannot afford to be not part of this process, because we're doing a lot of sustainability science and we should be contributing into this process. The second slide, we have been coming from far away. The human kind has been developing a lot of resources, using a lot of resources, so to speak. And the use of those resources has been depleting the renewable resources, the renewable fossil fuel, for instance, globally. A lot of waste has been coming from our activities, threats on living biosphere. And all this information has been concerned in a document which is called the Anthropocene. The era of human being in impacting on the globe in terms of environmental impact, pollution, climate change, and all those new things. And this has led to a lot of initiatives. All of them are urging for immediate action for environmental protection. It's very important to check back a little bit this Anthropocene evolution. All sectors has been evolving in a very quick space, and we need to find solution out of that. So let's now come down to the Sustainable Development Goals now. The Rio +20 meeting in 2012 is the turning point to arrive to these SDGs. And a lot of meetings have been held, and the recent one, which will be held very soon in New York, will be deciding and approving the SDGs. So we are in the right time in terms of thinking on how to contribute to that process. Those who are following Mina's presentation have seen that the business as usual, as you can see, is bringing to the center point, but now from the center point, which is where we are, there are several trajectories we can follow. We can be better off and follow the green trajectory for the future we want, but if you don't act now and use sustainable science, that's probably we're going to the red line. And how ICRAF is contributing to the trajectory toward the green line is the main question Peter has just asked, and we should address by the end of the day. 17 goals is very difficult to remember, but having 6 discussion areas could be important to really create this convergence of ideas on how to do these things. There are 6 key questions which might be useful for the discussion you will have this afternoon. The first key question is how to end poverty and hunger. It's very important, and many aspects of our work is around this question. The second one is the issue of inequality, empowering women, gender issues, and aspects which are behind. The third question is about sustainable economic growth. How do we promote economic growth sustainably using sustainable pathways? Fourth one is about, the dynamic planet and how to protect this dynamic planet, how to make sure that the resources we are using is not depleting the Mother Earth. The fifth one is about inclusive institution and capacity building for sustainable development. And the last one is about revitalize global partnership and try to have this framework and networking which is necessary, including engagement, including the private sector engagement, the participation of group of scientists across the world to really address those questions. So the 17 goals is really clear in the process, but how to structure the discussion point around those 17 goals to really contribute to the main objectives is something we should think about at the nutshell. These are the goals, you have seen them all. But let us now come to the rationale. Why is it so important to address those things? Currently, if you read the literature, if you go through the literature, you realize that there's a big deal of ecosystem damage. There's an estimation, if you take the GEO report of UNEP, the Global Environmental Outlook, about 6% of our terrestrial ecosystem, which are really jeopardized because of human impact. And that's really an alarming situation. We are talking about, in terms of climate change, not 2-degree warming, but 3-degree warming. And it's likely, by the end of the century, that we reach the 4-degree warming, despite all the efforts which are being said. The INDC is a new way to address the climate change. INDC stands for Intended Nationally Determined Contribution, to really solve the issue of the budget of carbon globally. But the contribution of countries now is yet very small as compared to the challenge we have. So we have a great deal of climate change with the warming which is heading to 3-degree target by 2050. We have 2 to 3 billion people in the middle class which is coming over in Africa, in Asia most likely. And this means a lot of consumption, a lot of pressure on the resources, a lot of pressure on natural resources, and also climate change. We're talking about multi-billion tons of natural resources being extracted per year of the Mother Earth. So all the signal of the extraction and the pressure of the resource is having this hockey stick sort of shape. It's going very rapidly up. It's not about only the natural resource extraction, but the impact of the extraction of those natural resources on us. And decoupling the natural resource extraction and the impact of the natural resources on us is something extremely useful. By extracting a petrol or oil somewhere has some impact, and we rarely assess this impact at global scale. So we need to do something, mostly for poor people. This is a recent release, I think, in Science Magazine, where a lot of $1 trillion of loss because of this impact of human beings on natural resources is hindered by this process. So it's costly not to deal with the impact of natural resource extraction, and we should be thinking about it. If we want some figures, this is how the GDP of the world has evolved in a recent publication by Crossman. It has been going up very, very rapidly. And look at the resource extraction base, with the scale is here, in the left side. The forest is in a good shape as compared to, for instance, the blue one, which is construction material, or the orange one, fossil energy carriers, and other minerals. But the impact of those minerals on forest is extremely high. In many mining areas, you will see that forest is depleted. And because of mining, actually, a lot of deal of ecosystem services conservation is compromised. So we have to think about this rapidly changing pace of natural resource extraction as a key entry point on how to see our Earth in terms of direct extraction and the impact of the extraction on the resources. So we have 3 principles, which are very simple in the SDGs. The first principle is universality. Development should not be for one part of humanity and we should not exclude another part of the humanity. It should be universal. Any objective or target, any principle should be federative enough to include the maximum, people across the world and mostly for poor. Universality is something. So when you think about solutions, we have solutions which are replicable. Some should we could be able to upscale to bring up to many different places depending to the type of context and needs of communities. The second principle is the transformative principle. We should be bringing solution that is a sort of breakthrough, that is a sort of turning point, that is changing the way we behave, the way we address those issues. So I've been developing the communities based on technical solution, and a lot of solutions are not actually technical, they must be behavioral. So we have to be changing our behavior in such way. And the last one, which is probably one of the things we have been discussing and we'll continue discussing it, is the integrated approach. And we discuss about boundary knowledge as a way to address the new challenges. And there is a big deal of integration when we talk about boundary knowledge, when we talk about boundary institution, who to collaborate with to have the salient science which is legitimate to address the issues we are talking about. So these are the key principles, and when we do this work in our site session, we think about universality, transformative, and integration if we want to have solutions which are relevant for the SDGs. Now comes the objectives. There are many objectives of the SDGs, but if you like, we can think about those aspects which are very relevant for ICRAF. The improved human well-being is one of them. I think there is no work in ICRAF where the ultimate objective is not the human well-being. Very relevant to us. Addressing the poorest world need, equitable economic development, limitation on imposed environment, and I will concentrate as a climate change specialist issue on climate resilient pathways. By addressing the SDGs, we address firstly the issues of climate change and vice versa. And I'm going to give you a bit of more hints on how climate change can be an important issue and how to link SDGs actually with IPCC in that respect. In climate change, a simple way to see it is to try to segment the adaptation versus mitigation, but in real world, adaptation and mitigation, they go together. The bottom boxes shows the areas where ICRAF would be really playing a big role. First box in blue is the mitigation can result in large co-benefits for human health and other social goals. So the fact of developing mitigation goals, and particularly in Rodell's session, you'll see that we have to also consider the issue of sustainability that is relevant for the SDGs. In terms of adaptation, all adaptive capacities are critical to well-being, and well-being is one of the big objectives of the SDGs. So it's very difficult to separate, to disentangle between SDGs and IPCC objective in that respect. So let's go deeper in IPCC work. The key message we have found in the 2014 report across all the 3 working groups. We have a working group on modeling, a second working group on mitigation, a third working group on responses, which is the adaptations. There are 3 key messages. We focus on the third message, which says specifically that we have the means to limit climate change while building more prosperous and sustainable future. Responding to climate change issues should not be constrained development. It's not mutually exclusive. So we can think about climate solutions that are relevant for development, that are relevant for sustainable development. And that's really the challenge we need to think ahead. And most of these solutions nowadays are so costly that it excludes a lot of poor communities. So we have to think about cost effectiveness, the cost of abatement rate, and what it takes technically and in terms of capacities for local communities who are poor to be participating in the climate change process while pursuing development needs. And that's something extremely useful to think about. So development pathway that affect greenhouse gases should ask the question, how by developing and what are the options of development and how those options for development has some impact in terms of emitting greenhouse gases. Not all development options are, CO2 neutral. And inversely, climate change affects all aspects of the development agenda. And here is the illustration. In order to be in the safe space, in a space between a red line, which is high emission, a compromised Earth, and a place which is the green line where we emit reasonably, which is, if you take the RCPs, will be the lowest RCP, 2.5, and the highest one will be a highest RCP, which is 8.6. In between, that's where our safety is. That's where we can survive as humanity. And there is none of these objectives in the SDGs that cannot contribute to that itinerary, to this pathway, recent concentration pathways. And if we take them one by one, based on the categorization of least developed countries, emerging economies, and developing countries, you can see that the priority can change, the target can change, the objective can change. Least developed countries will be doing more adaptation than anything else, so to speak. They can contribute to mitigation, but it's just a co-benefits when it comes to it. When you take the middle-income countries, like Indonesia and those Asian countries, they have to address both. They are poor countries, but they're also emitting a bit of CO2. So they have to see how to make the trade-off and make the balance between mitigation and adaptation. When you take the rich countries, the biggest effort, and we have been nudging down this message again and again, the biggest effort is mitigation. Although the responsibility are shared, and it's quite balanced across the world, we should be pushing all developed countries to invest a lot on abating the CO2 they're emitting on Earth, and maybe use some of the resources to address issues of adaptation in other places. So there's none of those objectives, including the governance aspect, which is the last one, institutional aspect, the capacity building aspect, which are in between, that does not contribute to this process, because we need technical aspect, we need training, we need collaboration, we need facilitation and partnership to respond to these challenges. So this is a connection with Future Earth, who is the IPCC. Future Earth was a baby also of Rio Plus 20. After they designed the SDGs, they say, okay, it's good to have development goals, but we need sustainable science to support the development goals. A network of SDGs, of SDGs has been put in place, and now Future Earth is in place with two big objectives. Scientific integration has been coming again and again. Future Earth is harnessing to develop this scientific integration. And the second objective is a co-production of knowledge. One way to do capacity building is to co-develop the knowledge, to apply the knowledge in the ground, and make sure that what we are doing is consistent with communities' need. And that raises the issues we have in the first day, all the boundary work, the boundary partnership, and all those issues we have been discussing with our the professor who just made a presentation from Harvard University. So Future Earth is well aligned on SDGs, and they're doing in the core area of research issues which are related to human natural drivers of global environmental change. Global change itself it's like a core area on the process, like planetary dynamics and human well-being. So now we have 6 areas where we are focusing our efforts on. Is a convening global science. We're trying to have many core projects, knowledge action network, trying to be having strategic partners with all relevant science domains across the world, including social science and all the economics aspects. The second one is about setting the research agenda, helping people to see what is the strategic research questions they should be asked themselves to address the issues of sustainability, mobilizing capacity, coordinating frontiers in research, communicating research in two ways. The communication should be, I learn from you and you learn from me. It's not just a pipeline of knowledge production and delivery of knowledge, but how the delivery can be a look back to the packaging of knowledge to be supportive to this process, and then engaging with decision makers. This is the loop of things which is being nurtured in Future Earth, and that could contribute to these knowledge issues. And that could also contribute to the knowledge gap. It's not easy to develop the collaboration between the many areas we have in this cloud, but because things are complex, and when it's very complex, scientists seem to be simplifying the science, in order to be having in-depth understanding of what is going on. But we definitely need to build that gap by trying to establish the bridge and contact between people themselves, the scientists themselves, before we establish the bridge between scientists and development. So, at the nutshell, we have to think deeply how to really bridge this knowledge gap, how to do it. It's not easy to do interdisciplinary work. You double the pain and you have the gain, as a scientist was saying somewhere, and that's really the problem where we are facing here. I think at this point, I would call Maina to give you the rest of the lecture.
Follow the old pedagogic principle here that if you hear something from one person, you don't believe it. If you hear it from two persons, you might think, hey, and if you hear it from three persons, hey, that must be... So Peter told you what we were going to tell you. Jack told it, and now I'm going to tell what Jack told. So you'll see a lot of repetition, but it is hopefully, and as Jack said, we either think or we think. Yeah? As a world, we either start to think or we think. Now, one version why we think indeed is this issue of the footprint. Yeah? The specific numbers of this were estimates made around 2005. If you look at the Earth and the global resources and you compare it with our resource use, we're already overshooting by 40% 2005. But now these numbers are a lot more than that. I don't know how many of you noticed, but on 9th of August this year, the world celebrated this big word. We recognized the overshoot day. So if you count the global resources we have for this year, by the 9th of August, we already used it. And we're already now in overshoot time. Well, probably the people living in some countries actually overshot already by February or March. And if you come to other parts of the world, they actually don't overshoot. They only use half of their allotment for this year. So there's a huge spread in that. But I think the overshoot day is an interesting perspective because many other days are on the same day every year. The overshoot day is dramatically moving towards 1st of January. Yeah? And what we want to do is to nudge the overshoot day back towards December, and that is our target. So if you look at the ecological footprint, yeah, it's basically a supply-demand issue. Yeah? We basically see on one hand, we have the Earth, and there's no way we can make it bigger. Well, in the Netherlands, we can say we make a little extra polder in the sea somewhere, but by and large, we don't make the world bigger. So we have to do with what we have. So the only way is to make it more productive. If you look on the demand side, there are three basic factors. There's the size of the human population. There's not much politically that can be done about that. It's only trying to create the conditions that we speed up the demographic transition. Second is the well-being per person. And we definitely want a lot of poor people to get out of poverty, which means they would require more well-being. And the third is the footprint intensity. What is the footprint per unit well-being of a person? So really, the only 2 degrees of freedom we have in this is to dramatically reduce the footprint intensity, get a lot more well-being per unit resource use on one hand, and on the other hand, to increase that productivity, but productivity not just for maize and wheat and rice and single commodities, but productivity of all the things we need for human well-being. Yeah, so we see on one hand that, I still make the mistake, this doesn't work. Yeah, the freedom is where human development index is about the only way to get demographic transition. The faster people are more developed, the quicker family size goes down, and we do something about that. At the same time, an increased human development index by and large means greater well-being and greater demand for resources. And on the footprint intensity, that's the only place to do something about it. Now, slightly more technical, we can say this footprint is our planet appropriation ratio. What part of the planetary resources are we appropriating, are we claiming for our single species Homo sapiens? Well, not very sapiens, because we think before we think. Yeah? But that's sort of the technical side, and we need to bring that planet appropriation ratio back down to 1 and below 1 if we can. That is basically, from the equation, that is the number of people times their well-being times how much resources we need for 1 unit of progress on each of the SDGs. Now, it's very clear from that perspective that if we take all the SDGs one by one, we need so much land for food, and so much land for water, and so much land for biodiversity, and so much land for energy, and so much land for the... There's no way we get there. So the only way to make progress on that front really is the land equivalent ratio. How much do we get from one parcel of land? Yeah. Now, in intercropping, in technical agroforestry, we know land equivalent ratios can be substantially above 1 in agroforestry. We can get more out of it than comparative monocultures, but it has so far been evaluated in terms of physical production. If we can broaden that concept to all the other stuff we need for the other SDGs, yeah, so we can say our target and our claim is that with agroforestry we actually do produce multifunctionality, and we can bring down the global demand within that space. And that is a tall order, but I think we're not here to talk about small things today. Yeah, so in that sense, I think our story is that the SDGs are like a tree, and they're all connected, and to make progress on one SDG depends on the other branches. It's another complex process. You can put all the different SDGs in different branches of that same canopy. But the way to get there is through the trunk, and the trunk is negotiated options in context. How do we get to the trunk? Well, we need roots, and we need roots of knowledge. We need roots of understanding the process, having the data, being able to learn, being able to recognize, see patterns and expect, and that is the job that we do. So on one hand, that learning has to be at the global scale, and we need the global monitoring of where we are relative to global resources, and we need all the criteria and indicators and M&E systems of the world to see whether we're doing that. On the other hand, the learning has to be local and has to be based on people living in their own landscapes, in their own context, and making their own choices that gradually nudge toward the greater good that we have. So we have the two challenges. On one hand, the global monitoring system, objective and remote sensing based and whatever, as lean and clean and smart as we can get it. On the other hand, we need to engage in that messy process of conflict and negotiations in real landscapes and see how we can make that local learning align with the stuff that comes from the global part. So you'll see this list of 17 many times over, and the purpose is that by tomorrow, no, by the end of the day, Famudin, what is number 17? Okay. I mean, it's a lot of jargon that is spread over us, but I think we have to learn to speak that language. Well, from the agroforestry side, we can reduce that list of 17 to something smaller. And we can say, actually for us, the end of poverty, the goal 1, and the inclusive economic growth are the same thing. And we see agroforestry as a primary vehicle of green growth and a shift towards a more service-based economy. We can also say that the goals that are about ending hunger, ensuring healthy lives, and sustainable consumption are coming together quite nicely. So we can have one cluster of things that deals with these 3 SDGs we see that the goals around water and the goals around oceans and the mangroves and the interface of land and oceans can be treated as one entity, and we can look at how agroforestry and mangroves play a role there. We can see that the goals around energy, smarter cities, better infrastructure all come together, and we can reduce the energy need for air conditions if we have more trees in our cities cooling the place, etc. We can see that the issue of climate change, which is here replicating the whole UNFCCC agenda, that agroforestry has a clear role to play in that domain. And similarly, in the SDG that represents the Biodiversity Convention, agroforestry is an important element of that game. And then we're left with the white things out here, which are more in the institutional sense and in the way we need to get our institutions and the way humans deal with humans to move forward to make real progress on that front. So that's the last one. So what we did in this process to try to bring together what do we know, what can we tell people about agroforestry in the SDG context, we asked people to prepare what do we know in each of these 8 areas that we have marked out here. Actually, we marked out 7, but we think the food and health part we split into 2 parts. At the same time, we very much believe that the gender goal is not to be treated as something standalone. We need to make sure that gender issues are mainstreamed, are taken on board in everything, and actually all of them have a gender dimension the way they are defined. That's the global stuff. The local stuff, the types of landscapes in which you all walked around yesterday, look like this, and there is rice fields, and there is agroforest, and there is forest, and there is people connecting on that front. And our challenge is to connect that language of the SDGs and the high-level stuff with the people we deal with on a day-to-day basis in the landscapes where we work. So, as a synthesis of these 8 briefs, I think there are 4 key findings, 4 high-level things that we can say, and there are 4 implications that has. So the first to say is indeed that with current human population size, resource use already exceeds planetary boundaries, and at the same time, a lot of people have the right to develop and to grow and to increase their own resource use. So the only way to make that fit is a very substantial increase in land productivity, stop any ongoing degradation that we have, and in that domain we think agroforestry options have a lot to offer. The second point in that is, if we would sum up all the area that we need for all the different SDGs one by one, that's far more than we have. So the solution really is, to what degree are we contributing on the same piece of land to multiple SDGs and their interfaces? And there, our history of agroforestry, the land equivalent ratio stuff, we actually have some real things to offer. The third is that the historical way of segregating agriculture from forestry is actually associated with a lot of conflict. And a lot of conflict that prevents people from making progress along the sustainable development domain. And our specific role is in helping to resolve those conflicts that come from the past and create the paradigms that will allow us to move forward. The fourth is that development as a paradigm has so far benefited from splitting up different things, and you have a ministry for water and a ministry for forest and a ministry for beekeeping and a ministry for agriculture and a ministry for whatnot. And a lot of progress has been made by that, but we can only get further if we find ways to integrate it. So the 4 things where agroforestry help is, first of all, as a land use system that can be productive in multiple ways. Second, explicitly focusing on the multifunctionality, the environmental services plus the goods that can be co-produced on the same unit of land. The third thing we have to offer is agroforestry as an institutional response, as a way of bringing things together that were separated in the past for historical reasons, but that are no longer relevant right now. And the fourth is agroforestry as a mindset, as a way of thinking that starts with integration, that starts with everything is connected, and doesn't start with we separate it out. Now, the last one is the most challenging even for us ourselves. last week, some of us met with a group of the World Bank in Indonesia that is thinking about how they can more integrate landscape approaches in the way they interact with the national government of Indonesia. They would use models that roughly look like this. They would see Indonesia, the Indonesian government, okay, what the government wants to have is GDP growth. It has a fiscal policy, it has different ways of nudging what goes on. It tries to influence tax and consumer spending and hope that all leads to investment. And the primary thing they want to get out of that is jobs. People would call it livelihoods, they would call it jobs. And okay, by the way, whatever people do has some effect on the environment. And by the way, it somehow interacts with peace, people, and poverty. Now, we open it a bit further. What are these jobs? Are these jobs in mining, in resource extraction? Yeah, that's the quickest way to get more GDP growth. Opening up the coal mines and getting stuff out. That's the way to get money in the GDP growth. But that's actually bringing us down on the other dimensions. Yeah, a lot of jobs that are in the extractive industry have been the one that fueled the growth we have so far. But we need to move jobs from extractive industries to plantations, to growing stuff. And we need to grow them into manufacture, doing something beyond the primary products. We need to move them primarily into a service economy. So we need to help. Now, where is agroforestry? Well, along that pathway, we can see different forms of agroforestry providing jobs in multiple ways. We also need to really open that box of the rights, responsibility, the demography, the resource access to more progress on that front. And then we start to see that these 17 SDGs sprinkle around that whole diagram. Yeah? So if we talk with an Indonesian government or any other government for that matter, at that high level, we need to sort of not say that, yes, we have an experiment and we show that the maize yield was 20% higher under the trees. Sorry, we need to translate it into this frame, into this connection. And that's, I think, again, we see agroforestry as a land use system that helps on that job and livelihood frame. And we see agroforestry in the box of the people and the conflicts and the peace and whatever happens there. And I think that's the sort of way we need to, the language we need to learn to speak to speed up. So one way to say here is in our different groups of SDGs, in each of them, we see a single thing that agroforestry can do and should do, but we really need to look at that matrix. So what is the interface between green economy and food security, green economy and water, green economy and climate? What is happening on the interface of climate versus water? The interface of, yeah? So the set of briefs that we develop, we first of all, using each of these things as an entry point, but we want to show that we can contribute to this more integrative thing out here. And that's what our challenge out here. And that's why we want to share at this point in time what the different teams have come up with. We started these teams back in April. Some have been active from the start. Others are a rather late rush to catch up with it. That's okay. What we have so far is a first attempt at what are these key findings, what are the implications. And we want to use the rest of this morning in smaller groups to thrash it out and to throw out what we have now and say we have something much more important. Yes, let's do that way. If they survive the current, that's fine also. Yeah? So that's the process we have for today. So the first of them is the brief about the green economy, and Lei will take you through the rest.
So the first one, we will see then how the agroforestry can integrate and take part into the green growth. So we have 3 findings so far, so it's very open for you to give inputs to this or to modify or add. And in this case, we see that the first finding will talk about how the agroforestry can contribute into the development of green growth at the sub-national level. And the second one, we are zooming into how agroforestry contributes into the farmers at the local level, how it can give more security of income at their livelihood at the household level. And the third one, it's beyond of the financial income, like how the strengthening of rights and also a secure and tenure can contribute into their reduce of poverty. Well, this is our team. Myself, Sonia, Dewi, Lalisa from Nairobi, James, Rosetko, Sacha, Miyuki, Lars, and Pablo Pacheco from C4. And basically, in our session, we will kind of to see like what have become the findings of the ICRAF scientists in terms of to see how the green growth at the subnational level. So here we bring the study from Sonia Dewi and colleagues in Indonesia, in Jambi. In one of the districts in Jambi, we can see that how the green development with the assumption that the district retains their forests, restoring degraded area, and also establishing oil palm, acacia plantation, and agroforest in the shrub and wasteland can contribute into the GDP of the sub-district and also contribute into the labor absorption. So if you see that there are 3 scenarios are being simulated here, and the modified green, which is on the top with the yellow line, it can have a potential in the increasing both the GDP and the labor absorption at the sub-district level. And then the second one, if we see some findings of the ICRAF scientists in Ethiopia, as well as in our Indonesia in South Sulawesi, here we can see that there are some contributions of agroforestry income at the first household level. And then the first one on the left is the work from Lalisa in Ethiopia. He compares different types of agroforestry and simulated into the 15 years and see the impacts of how the agroforest can have a stable income contribution at the household level. While on the left, you can see in the purple one and also the yellow. I don't have one. Anyway, those incomes are coming from tree-based system or agroforest. So it ranges from 30 until 50% and more that can help them to get more money for income from a land-based system. And the third one, this is some time ago. So working with the IFPRI, we are analyzing some impacts for how through the better governance of agroforest in the protected lands, it can contribute into both farmer incomes and also the stock of the multi-purpose trees on the degraded lands. So there will be 3 findings that we will be discussed in the first session here in the forest hall. So your inputs are very welcome. Thank you.
So, in addressing the food security with gender being a very key aspect, it's important to realize that the way that these SDGs are configured, it actually combines sustainable agriculture with food security and nutrition. So it's already a very integrated agroforestry way of thinking about development. If we look at some of the key findings that have come from what we've been looking at, we've got a critical issue in relation to soil health. So 30% of Africa's soils, for example, are now unresponsive to fertilizer use, despite being nutrient deficient, probably because of the loss of soil ecology. And we know that trees increase the abundance and the activity of beneficial soil organisms and soil health. And we're just on the cusp of being able to use modern advances in genomics that can show us profiles, functional profiles of soil biota to tackle the coming up with specifics about how much tree cover and tree diversity that's needed to address soil health. Soil health is coming along in the long term. This is the sustainability issue. If we look at soil fertility itself in terms of what yields people are getting, trees have been shown to be significant in being able to make differences to crop yields. But there's quite a variation in what happens, and we get big differences between the potential yield gains from research trials and the actual yield gains that farmers are achieving in impact studies of how trees are affecting things on farms. And we're getting increasing amounts of data like this that show us, the critical thing that they show us is that mean differences are not very helpful, because the means are hiding a huge variation in the experience that we get in individual circumstances. And if we can understand how you get those higher impacts by using the right trees in the right place in the right way, then we can hugely increase the gains from using trees appropriately, including the places where trees are not going to be helpful. It's not a universal panacea, it's about the right option in the right context. And there are huge changes in the way that as you transform agricultural and rural economies, that there's a tendency to do something which Miner refers to as outsourcing. I think that's not the best word actually, because normally you have a contract when you outsource, but instead of producing staple foods, moving to buy your staple food and to be producing saleable items that you're not consuming yourself. And there's very interesting work in Southeast Asia here that goes towards that. So we've got our two goals here that are working together. And the way we've been approaching this is to look at, and we should start with a system, with interactions, with how these things are connected together. Very much what Bill Clark was saying about stepping out into the real world, and we're dealing with a complex adaptive system. And our trees in agricultural systems are affecting the soil health and soil fertility, water, food, fodder, fuel production. These things are having positive impacts on productivity per unit of land and water, sometimes via livestock, but also through general system intensification leading to higher labour productivity, which means that people have then got time to devote to other livelihood opportunities. So we can't keep a focus that's only on the agricultural elements in these livelihood transitions. And critically, fuel, cooking and heating are a critical component of nutrition, as well as the amount of food that's being produced. And there are interesting interactions between income and food and nutrition. Not always positive. Income can go up and nutritional quality can sometimes go down. So, looking in a little bit more detail at unpacking the fertilizer tree story, you can see here the sort of iconic meta-analysis that Seleshi did in 2008, showing about 100% increase, or about a tonne per hectare extra across sub-Saharan Africa, but mainly from research trials and very large variations about the mean. If we look at the sort of impact evaluations, we're getting more like 10 to 35%, 15 to 25% in the Sahel. Again, with very huge variation, which we're now beginning to understand through more detailed analysis of those data. But also in the Sahel, that was a study that Frank Place led, a very small proportion of production entering trade at all. So there's a huge opportunity for greater market integration. So that's why we focus so much on options by context, because that's where large gains are to be made. And this shows you in the red line there, and this is a very important way for us to look at data. Here you've got the proportion of cases, or the probability if you like, versus the yield difference. So 0, that line, black line at 0, is showing us all of these farms in this initial, that's Gliricidia in Malawi. About 25 to 30% of farmers are getting no increase or less as a result of using Gliricidia. beyond the black line, they're getting more, and you can see that there are only a few farmers who are doing extremely well as a result, getting more than 4 tonnes extra. And then you can see some lines from other studies that are mean values. But this is the way that we need to look at things, because it's also showing us what is the risk to a farmer of adopting any of these particular options. Now, if we can understand the circumstances in which we get the higher yields, then of course the risk to the farmer to adoption comes down. With water, and water is a critical issue of soil fertility, and it happens at a range of scales. At a field scale, we're seeing that the fine scale nature of variation gets even tighter. So Jule Bayala's recent work on hydraulic lift shows that it's not just about where you are, what climate and weather you're in, but even the actual distribution of rainfall in a particular year may determine whether or not there's a net benefit to crops growing close to trees from the hydraulic lift versus the other competitive interactions. At a landscape scale, are we getting groundwater recharge through more trees in the landscape, or are we losing more water as a result of transpiration? And then at the continental scale, what's happening to that water that's gone out for transpiration? And there are huge governance issues at the landscape and now at the continental scale, which we really need to tackle, and they're very new areas. I said a lot of the actual benefits to trees come through the overall system integration, and it's all about these interactions, and modelling these interactions is a key challenge that we now face. In terms of gender, the critical issue is how much are women and girls involved in decisions about the management of these issues, including what trees there are and on what land are they, and also what is their labour productivity. And quite often the labour productivity of women is much lower than of men, and that is a critical issue that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
The slide says Ramni, so you must close your eyes and have a good imagination in order not to be disappointed. When Meine started out by saying that you would hear things 3 times, it reminded me of a quote from Alice in Wonderland, where one of the characters says, "What I say 3 times must be true." So now you're going to hear the same thing multiple times. You may recall from one of our sessions on Monday that I asked all of you to think about the genetic resources when you are in your agroforestry field. And why did I do that? Well, because they are your evolutionary path. They are your building blocks for production, what Fergus has shown, and they are the buffer against change, whether it's environmental, locally in terms of pests and diseases, or globally in terms of climate change, but also economically, whether it's change in local markets or global markets. So you may wonder why there's no mention of genetic resources on this slide. Well, maybe it was because it was put together by Meine and not by me. Joke aside, on a serious note, we of course have to look at these 3 Sustainable Development Goals on achieving health, sustainable consumption, and gender equity in a manner where we say, okay, what's in it for us? How do they contribute to what we are doing? Or maybe that's the wrong way around. Maybe it's rather about what we can contribute to those. And I think also that's what has been emphasized by the previous speakers. if we take them from the bottom, I would say, on the slide, I would say that, I mean, we probably do not need to discuss gender. I mean, it was also reflected by the way, I mean, well, we need to discuss it, but the importance of it we do not need to discuss because we agree on that. And it was also emphasized by the way Mine had put gender in all the different combinations. So if we go to the second one on consumption, then if we actually look at the sub-targets of this goal, then it's about a lot of other things that we are dealing with. It's about food waste, it's about chemicals, it's about regulations, but it's also about natural resources. But probably what the politician thinks mostly about are the dead ones that are not renewable. So our task is actually to make a better point of the plants as the living capital of the earth. And there are obviously links along the whole value chain to this that are important in the work that we do. On the last one, I mean, healthy lives is also about a lot of other things that we have in mind. And again, the focus of sub-targets are in many different areas. But there is this important link to nutrition, which Fergus was also talking about. So we will deal with that in relation also to the productive systems. And the last slide is then actually about these links between agroforestry, health and nutrition, which we will explore further in the session D22 in the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm supposed to talk about the terrestrial ecosystem, and we know the terrestrial ecosystem started with 300 million years ago, and then really shaped our tree and other very important part of the terrestrial ecosystem. Then we talk about the 3 million years ago when human entered the planet or terrestrial ecosystem, and then started with 10,000 years ago, we actively used fire to burning convert the agricultural land, and then within 300 years, and we talk about the Anthropocene, and then basically, and how we convert almost 1/3 of our planet ecosystem into today's so-called agricultural land. So that's also very important. We need to understand the historical change. And recently we do analysis, global, how much historically tree cover loss. So we come out as a figure and very similar to Dutch scientists publishing in Nature, and then we come out 42 to 50% tree cover loss historically. Of course, China and was a populated nation, and we lost more even, and more than half or 2/3 of a tree cover loss historically. And then, of course, and the good side, and also another analysis we're doing with the ribosomal, and also, and we do have good side, and then now see the increased tree carbon and what's called the slow agroforestry on agricultural land, increase the carbon storage. Of course, the problem now is most agricultural land are particularly damaged by heavy pollution, and like Chinese situation, 2/3 of agricultural land is either what's called polluted by heavy metal or the degraded according to the soil carbon standard. So that's the situation we're dealing with. Of course, what we can offer, not only is the sequence of carbon through the tree planting in agricultural land, but also very provide a very important phytoremediations, and such as heavy metal, antibiotic, and others. So nitrogen fixing, that's additional value we can bring through the trees, not only as green fertilizer mentioned by Fergus, but also sequence of carbon and then improve the productivity of agricultural land. So the third approach, and we are working on actively, and slow the recycle, that's integration of forestry, agriculture, but also the livestock, slow the recycle all byproducts from forestry and agriculture. So rubber seeds oil, and that's very good novel story, and we are developing, and also very important how to link also all biomass through the mushroom cultivation and improve the wild harvesting from the forest management, which you see, and the fungi mushrooms shooting, and now the BBC even like to bring the large public. So we are working on not on single species, but a group of different species, and particularly the mushroom, and then we found also we have shortlisted 108 wild mushroom can be potentially and also domesticate for smallholder farmers. So then also the land decisions are very important. We put conservation, we put for more agricultural intensification. Land sharing, land sparing are very important. There's always trade-off, and to find where is a high potential for agriculture, but sometimes those areas often also high economic environmental value. So when we build the road, when we build infrastructure, and then when we invest to convert into plantation, how we include land decision at global, regional, and local scale. And then also the story, and also that we come out, that's our analysis, and we just submit to Nature Communication and under the review, and that's our estimation and the tree cover loss in the history. But also we also have very good analysis how recent, since 2000 to now, in the past 12 years, how much tree cover lost, even compared to China and also global picture. And my final slides, it's really, and the Zomo doing very actively, that's our ICRAF potential contribute, so really look at the promote agroforestry in agricultural land, slow the tree planting, and how much biomass we can produce, but very important, how much carbon we can sequestrate. So bigger player, 3 countries, Brazil, Indonesia, and China, and we have seen the huge increase the carbon in agricultural land through the what's called the tree planting. But also other side, we have some countries like Argentina, Sierra Leone, and also what's called the Myanmar, and we're still facing tremendous biomass or tree cover loss in agricultural landscape. So that's, and finally also, and we do exercise in the Mekong region, how we combine with agricultural potential, with a high potential for biodiversity conservation, and then we come out 1 kilometer resolution, which combine all population socio-economic data, and also for trade-off analysis in the region.
Thank you. The problem with SDG 6 about water is that it is very much defined on the human side, on the number of people with access to safe drinking water and sanitation, and all the targets are framed at that level. And it doesn't talk in its own right about what we need to do in order to secure that. It does talk as if water is just a supply issue. Water is there anyway, we just need to get it in the hands of everyone, and clean water and sanitation needs to be provided. We understand that water, there isn't enough water to go down. If you simply look at all the demands that are pushed on that, there is a real issue of who gets to use water for what. And we know that in order to achieve SDG 6, we need to manage our watersheds in better ways, and we need to do that based on a full understanding of the hydrological cycle and the relations. Forest, trees, agroforestry do have important things to say in that sense, have important contributions to make, but they will be one step behind what is being seen and what's being monitored in the SDG process, and I think we need to be clear on that message. At the same time, the SDG about the oceans, it is very clear that there are many problems in the oceans itself, but there are also a lot of stuff happening on the interface between terrestrial systems and oceans, and the mangrove stories is important for that as feeding the breeding the fish and all the things on that front. So we do need to get these things seen together. Now, we think an important finding for us is that we need to move beyond that blue water focus into the full hydrological cycle, and we need a stronger performance-based way of looking at watersheds where buffering and the roles that agroforestry and well-managed soils play in buffering gets quantified and treated separately. So our simple thing is that the basic equation in water balance is about water coming in and water going out. Well, it goes out either through the river and it can be used somewhere else as blue water, or it goes back to the atmosphere. The recent re-emphasis on the recycling is that what gets lost to the atmosphere is not lost to the universe, but quite a bit of it comes back as rainfall somewhere else. And by changing tree cover, we are actually influencing rainfall in neighboring and adjacent areas, and that's an important area to understand. So the way we manage tree cover in terms of climate is not just about the carbon. A lot of that is interacting with the hydrological cycle. That extra evapotranspiration of trees is the cooling effect. The cooling effect we can understand in a quantitative sense, and we need to shift that whole discourse of climate linked with water. Within that, there are some areas that are interesting and highly controversial. We know that water vapor moves over continents, the prevailing winds. We can estimate how much that is. We don't know whether forests attract the flows of humid air. Some people strongly believe in that, others say we don't know on that. There's some reasonable evidence that the biological things floating around in the atmosphere actually are helpful in creating rainfall, and the ice nucleating bacteria from phyllosphere, and that different vegetation differs in how much they do on that. The details of that, we don't know, and I think it is key important areas that we get better on that front. So, within that water, behind the SDG, the way it is framed, we need to unpack that story of the hydrological cycles and connect with the new ways we now understand the trees and forests to manage. Henry, reincarnation.
Yes, so as you can see, I'm not Miyuki, but she's the one who prepared this slide, and I have only 2 slides, and I'll be pretty quick. SDG on energy, this is like the forgotten MDG, the Millennium Development Goals that didn't happen because, for many, many reasons, and we can only speculate why they didn't really happen, but one of the good news is that the Sustainable Development Goals will have one on energy access and affordability. Problem with this SDG is that it is completely without any quantifiable targets. Now we have sort of wise words and wishful thinking, but nothing that we can work towards in terms of what we want to achieve with access to energy to all by 2030. Basically, that's what the SDG is promoting. They're talking about sustainable energy, but when you break it down further, there is no more talk about sustainable energy. Instead, there is talking about modern energy services. Now, what does that mean? It's not really clear, but many people interpret this as not being biofuel, which is considered sort of backward and dirty, providing a lot of death through exposure to smoke. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done in order to change the perception of tree-based bioenergy as being backward-looking, not modern, traditional, not what we want for the future. And at the same time, we also know that tree-based bioenergy is of incredible importance, that it is growing in Africa in particular, but also partly in Asia, and that there is a huge demand for it. And that demand is not going to go down. So we have sort of a conflict of interest. The politicians often are not interested, donors are not interested, and on the other hand, we have the population that is just continuing to use bioenergy traditional forms of bioenergy, and making that shift, that transition, is one of the challenges we face. So some of the hypotheses really that we've come up with so far, the development so far has been strongly correlated with modern energy access and reduced woodful reliance. But the energy ladder hypothesis, which foresees that with growing development, people move out of the use of traditional forms of bioenergy, burning firewood, for instance, is not really what is happening, what we're seeing in Africa in particular. So we need to make an analysis and develop strategies that help us understand how this really works in Africa and other parts of the developing world. And we need to understand what role agroforestry can play in this context, because there is a huge opportunity for that. And let me just bring this down to the charcoal demand. Charcoal as an energy source is growing because it's an urban fuel that is used by the urban population all the way up to the higher middle classes. And as people migrate towards urban areas, and we now live in a time where over 50% of the population globally lives in urban areas, this will continue at least for the next couple of decades. And at the same time, we have a decline in tree cover because this charcoal that is being produced is produced in unsustainable ways. So we can see that there is a demand that we have to meet, and there are opportunities for improving the sustainability of charcoal as a commodity, and one of the biggest commodities in Africa in particular. We can see that by improving the production of charcoal, by improving the cooking stoves that are used by the consumers, and by improving, by extracting the wood for charcoal from agroforestry systems, short rotation plantations, woodlots, we can reduce the demand for tree cover, for trees that provide the demand for charcoal significantly, and that into the future. For liquid biofuels, there is also an increase in demand, most of this currently coming from annual crops, soybean in particular, but also tree crops like oil palm oil. And we can see that this happens in ways that can be either sustainable or non-sustainable. So far, sustainable, the liquid biofuels have not contributed very strongly to the development and the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, and we have to explore the opportunities that agroforestry offers in doing so. Greening cities, this is sort of the connection to the other SDG that we have been asked to write upon. There is a connection, and I already mentioned that now 50% of the population lives, over 50% lives in urban areas. There is a connection with greening space in urban areas, reducing temperatures in urban areas, and even increasing sequestration of carbon in urban areas that we can explore potentially with agroforestry systems, small-scale agricultural systems, urban agriculture, where trees and fruits in particular play a significant role. I just have one more slide, and how do I make this change? This graph shows the Human Development Index on the x-axis, growing development, and all of the countries you can see here are developing countries or countries in transition. And then we have the Energy Development Index, which represents the access and affordability to energy services and energy in these countries. You can see that all the way up to the top, countries use bioenergy, although to a decreasing amount, and that sort of reflects the energy ladder theory. We can also see that those countries that have the lowest Human Development Index are those that are using the greatest amount of bioenergy. But that is not necessarily a correlation. That just reflects the fact that those countries that have low development index are stuck in in energy systems that are very backward, and that it is necessary to improve the energy access for these countries to develop further. So, but not necessarily is bioenergy unsustainable, as we can see from the talk. It just means that bioenergy is used to a greater degree in those countries that have a very low human development index, and that it is necessary to connect bioenergy use to more, in more sophisticated forms to create more modern energy supply systems. Thank you very much.
Make this quick. Key findings, first of all, FTA can enhance adaptation of local communities to climate change or climate hazards and disasters. 2, FTA enhance resilience, help reduce poverty and promote goods or food security of smallholder farmers. 3rd, FTA activities can attain climate change adaptation and or mitigation and adaptation at the same time, a key message of our SP. And finally, FTA can significantly reduce greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. That is, of course, mitigation. And so how can agroforestry help, or FTA in general, forestries and agroforestry? First, by integrating into the broader disaster risk reduction programs and adaptation strategies of developing countries. And this is so important because the SDG here, SDG 13, calls for adaptation to climate risk as well as disasters. So they combine these two communities together, the climate change adaptation community as well as the disaster risk community. Secondly, encourage the inclusion of FTA in national climate change action plans and technology exchange. And third, support REDD+ and other processes in the UNFCCC negotiations. Again, SDG 13 is unique in that the main activities or the main process will still be the UNFCCC. The SDG will not hijack that process, but is recognizing that UNFCCC is the main platform where countries will cooperate and collaborate to address climate change. And finally, encourage the inclusion of FTA as well in NAMAs and INDCs. We have to keep track of how agroforestry is being included in these documents. So there are, of course, many of us authors here, and I just recognize them here, Bruno from C4, as well as our colleagues here at ICRAF. And so here's the summary of our finding. Society, and that includes smallholder farmers, they are so vulnerable to climate change, we all know that. And so FTA can help society, in our case smallholder farmers, adapt to climate change. But at the same time, climate variations and change will affect FTAs, that is on the right side, the impacts, and therefore we also need to add ecological resilience to our agroforestry systems. And of course, FTA going up also is critical in mitigation. So we also included some key evidences of this. And here's one study looking at the role of mangroves. There's a lot of interest on coastal protection and mangroves, trees, and of course even agroforestry could help reduce, for example, in this case, storm surge. Another piece of evidence here is also work of our colleagues in Nairobi, and here's showing the impact of agroforestry in farm productivity as well as household wealth. And also in Africa, this is the work of Sheikh and others, showing the carbon storage and sequestration potential of FTA. And so just the last slide here, the way forward, of course, we know that in a very kind of coarse and general level, but we need more robust evidences that indeed what we're saying can be backed by science. So we believe that we need further assessment on the contribution of agroforestry in temperature and moisture buffering against climate variability. We need a deeper understanding of how and under what situations or conditions smallholder households maintain and adopt these systems in the face of changing climate, and also new approaches to overcome adoption barriers such as lack of secure tenure, information gaps, and of course how to link agroforestry to climate, food security, and development policies. And finally, just the various contexts where FTA systems can help mitigate the risk of disasters. I think we need to do more a lot on this. We haven't touched that a lot, but I think we need to do more on this. And with that, let me end it there. Thank you so much.
The opportunity to cumulatively over time, incrementally develop knowledge and understanding. It is about also looking at the fundamental socializing function of education, to be able to look at the valuing of food in relation to agroforest, in relation to trees, and in relation to natural resources management, so that it is a whole form of interrogating our assumptions of food outside the context, outside of the context within which it is produced. So revaluing food in relation to natural resources is a discussion that we started out in this short paper and hope to take it forward. So we hope that we'll be able to take it forward in the discussions coming on. The question of gender cuts across. We've had, as a number of folks have mentioned, it's about repeating what is emerging as incredibly important. But it is not just addressing the differences in gender across, access or use to natural resources, specifically in the context of agroforestry. But it is also about unpacking that very murky context that overlays gender. Gender as a relationship between men and women that is inequitable, plays out not just in the family, but at the community level, at the societal level. So it's very complex, but it's also overlaid by other axes of difference when we talk about ethnicities and clans, and all of those make it even more complicated. So it is to make sure that gender is interrogated across those very complex axes of ethnicities. So it's about gender and social inclusion. So that we hope will also take forward in our discussion in the small group this morning. We looked at conflict and peace building approaches to natural resources management. I remember very early on in my early life when a professor of mine once told me that the wars of the future are going to be wars that are going to be driven by natural resource conflicts. And that's where we are today. We see that it is happening within communities, it is happening between nations, it is happening within families. And so we are going to be interrogating how cooperative measures, cooperative strategies can be useful means forward to begin to address conflict issues within natural resource management. And then we talked about knowledge. We kind of quickly assessed, did a quick scan of the knowledge, the literature on knowledge as it relates to agroforestry, and clearly understand. We know that there is a tension between understanding knowledge as a mobile, immutable thing. In other words, it's something you can take from place to place, as opposed to contextualizing knowledge. So social context is critical in understanding the role that trees play in production landscapes, so that we do not come, we're going to be interrogating how the importance of the local context, the importance of contextual specificity in understanding how trees play a role in the SDGs outside forests landscape. So this is a quick one. I just got a 5-minute alert that I should do this, but we hope to take it forward in the breakout sessions and make sure we do justice to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we had a marathon really of a lot of presentations, and I'm sure that people are itchy with questions, but we are a bit over time for coffee. We are already 10 minutes into coffee, so I'll urge you to just get into the group. If you have any specific questions on the things that people have presented, please get into the groups and discuss that. But just to remind you, in the groups also, we would like you to think a little bit broader than your specific goals, because one of the things that we are really looking for, and you would see we have 17 goals, we have 169 targets. God alone knows how many indicators there would be for each of those targets. The key question here is, what are those integrated approaches that are needed? How does agroforestry position itself as an integrated approach in terms of the global partnership? What can we do now, and what can we do going forward? Mine, I don't think we have, even for, if you have a 30 seconds reaction, not a question, a 30 seconds reaction, we can take 3 or 4 of them. 30 seconds. I'm going to be a bit difficult with stopping people after 30 seconds.
Thank you, Peter. 20 seconds only. First comment, one of the boundary conditions that is implied in everything we do is that we're only looking at the poor, we're only looking at smallholders. Yet to achieve many of these SDGs, we're going to be looking at all land users, including the middle class, and particularly the rich. Somebody who is managing 20,000 hectares of land is just as important as 20,000 people managing 1 hectare of land. Second point, totally brilliant summary of what's going on. It's just 3 times too long for policymakers. Can we figure out how to take all this wonderful information that was presented this morning and collapse it into a shit-hot presentation that each of us can carry around whenever we talk to people in suits and ties? Thank you.
Patrick, I can guarantee you that's where we're heading. That's what we want to do beyond today. Any quick reactions? 30 seconds?
That's your job, Patrick.
Okay. I think, okay, Steve quickly, and then Phil. Yes.
Just a quick one that there's frequently a tension between promoting agroforestry, talking about what agroforestry can do, and starting, on the other hand, with the integrated approach of which agroforestry can contribute to. Many donors and even more of our partners really get upset when they see us talk about how agroforestry, for example, contributes to soil fertility first, and then talk about, oh yes, it's part of an integrated approach. Often it's the other way around, that will be much more politically acceptable and also effective overall in solving the problem.
Thanks, Steve. Very good point.
Yeah, very quickly, superb introductory presentations. Thank you very much indeed. I think what we have to be very careful about is not treating this as a list that gives us a roadmap of what to do. If we actually look at at all the language around those SDGs, there's a huge emphasis on equity, prosperity, and peace. And what we need is some kind of a theory of change that allows us to convince people that we're contributing to the higher level goals. What we shouldn't get involved in is a me-too debate, which says, well, we do that box, then we do a bit of that box, and a bit of that box. That's what happened with the MDGs.
Thanks, Phil. Well said.
Thank you, Peter. I'm glad that we have the same language, that there is the difference in the language between we, the researcher, and the local government and landholders. And also different indicators where, for them, the short economic term, because they talk about the 5 times cycle while they're talking about the end of this century or by 2050. So I think we have to combine efforts to merge this language so that we can convey our message better to the local government and the landholders.
Really good points. Can we, one last one, 30 seconds? Okay, people want coffee. Yes, please.
Just quickly, I think we have to think also beyond the well-being, because one of the things that you said, one of the speakers said that we are always thinking of well-being. It's true, we will not stop to think that because we are human. But we have to think in the intrinsic value of the nature, and even if we work with agroforestry or with people, if we continue thinking only in well-being, we will not change.
Thanks, Giovanna. Really good point. I'm sorry we can't go any further because it's quarter past. Thank you very much. Can you give a big hand to all the presenters?